Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The aerospace giant Airbus says it will reconsider its future investment in the UK if Britain leaves the EU single market and customs union without a deal. The company says the warning is not part of Project Fear, but a dawning reality. Downing Street says it's confident that a good Brexit deal will be put in place. Airbus has 25 sites across the UK, employing more than 14,000 people and contributing an estimated £7 billion to the British economy every year. Their concerns today have been echoed by another major manufacturer. BMW has said uncertainty could damage the UK's car industry. Our business editor Simon Jack's report contains flashing images.
On a mission to air its fears over Brexit, the boss of Airbus in the UK issued a stark warning over the consequences of any interruption to their supply chains.
We're very fearful there'll be chaos at the borders, and we want our factories to be able to operate smoothly as possible.
Some politicians will say we've heard this all before, this is scaremongering, this is a reboot of Project Fear.
This is just a business person sitting here today explaining the risks we've evaluated for our business. I'm not a politician, and rather than Project Fear, this is dawning reality.
This wing-making factory in Broughton, North Wales is the biggest of Airbus's 25 UK sites, and local people are worried.
I've lived in Broughton all my life, and it'd be disastrous if they went for the community.
And it's not just Airbus, it's all the suppliers that supply them, isn't it, as well?
Airbus is not the only major manufacturer expressing concern about disruption to supplies. Here at the Mini factory in Oxford, 270 trucks deliver millions of components every day, just in time and in the right order to make one car every 67 seconds. Mini's owner BMW says it needs clarity on future trade and border arrangements by this summer.
If we don't get clarity in the next couple of months, we have to start making those contingency plans, which means investing money in systems that we might not need, in warehouses that might not be usable in the future, in effectively making the UK automotive industry less competitive than it is in a very competitive world right now. And that is a decisive issue that ultimately could damage this industry.
Advanced manufacturing is a delicate, finely tuned business. Minis may be made in the UK, but it's not as straightforward as that.
When it comes to symbols of British manufacturing, it doesn't get much more iconic than this. But how British is a Mini? Well, the steering wheel's from Romania, the front lights are from Spain, the rear lights are from Poland, the crankshaft is from France, and these components can go back and forth several times between here and the EU. In fact, of the components that go into this car, 60% come from the EU. You get a real picture of how it takes a continent to build a car.
The government insisted it is listening to business and wants the same things from the negotiation.
Our intention is to avoid unnecessary frictions at the border, to avoid tariffs. We couldn't be clearer in terms of our understanding of what the economy needs, and that is to be able to continue to operate a sophisticated, modern, just-in-time production system.
Airbus and BMW have long harboured concerns over Brexit. With 9 months to go before we leave the EU, those concerns have turned to alarm. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar is at Westminster for us tonight. So politically, what impact could these warnings from these two big businesses have?
Well, Sophie, a dose of potentially harsh reality has been injected into a debate that's come to seem theoretical and even irrelevant to many people. Brexiteers are calling it Project Fear, even bullying. But ministers like the Business Secretary and the Chancellor have been hearing and sharing the alarm of business leaders for months. And inside government, many are now pretty much writing off the idea of any breakthrough or substantial progress at next week's EU summit on the future customs relationship between Britain and the European Union. Now, Brexit ministers are saying, look, it'll be okay. The EU will play hardball to the very end and then compromise. And you can call that optimism or desperation, depending on where you stand. This drama of Brexit, Sophie, it's been slow and turgid. It's about to liven up, not necessarily in a good way, with one cliffhanger after another up ahead.
John Pienaar, thank you.
Airbus today dropped a Brexit bombshell on the government, warning it could pull out of the UK if no deal is agreed with the EU. The plane maker, which employs thousands of people in Britain, said crashing out of the customs union and single market would be catastrophic. It said it was forced to speak out as it feared Brexit negotiations wouldn't be a success. Downing Street insisted it's listening to the company's concerns and is confident of achieving a good deal. Here's our business editor, Joel Hill.
At the Airbus factory in North Wales, a beluga delivery aircraft takes to the skies. Would that Brexit had such momentum. It's 2 years since the referendum, but the government has yet to spell out what our future relationship with the European Union will look like. Airbus has had enough.
In the event of a no deal, Airbus will seriously look at future investments and reconsider our footprint in this country.
So there will be job losses if there is no deal, if Britain crashes out?
In the long term, if there's no future investment and our footprint is reduced, then jobs potentially could be affected, yes.
Airbus operates all over Europe. In the UK, it employs 14,000 people and provides work for 110,000 others in the supply chain. The company's main factories at Broughton and Filton assemble aircraft wings, but up to 70% of the wing parts are imported from France, Germany and Spain. The finished wings are then sent back to France and Germany to be bolted to aircraft, and Airbus worries that leaving the single market and the customs union will mean it takes longer and is more expensive to build planes. Airbus is basically telling the government time is up unless the company knows what Brexit will mean for the movement of its parts and its people and for regulation. Then it is indicating that by September it will start to make business decisions that will go against Britain. Before the referendum, Airbus warned a vote to leave might make the UK a less attractive place to do business. Now it's suggesting the future of this factory and others is in the government's hands.
There's a lot of jobs there. It's not going to be good for the community. So
they won't move, honestly. We're staying here.
Hopefully it won't happen. Fingers crossed. Like Theresa May can do the right thing.
Airbus is anxious, but the government insists plenty of other companies are investing in the UK. There's no need to worry.
We are very confident that we will this autumn negotiate a sensible future partnership with the European Union. And my message to business, yes, I know there are some uncertainties, but it is in everybody's interests that we secure a sensible agreement.
Airbus believes political progress is too slow, the future too uncertain, the transition period too short. Privately, other companies share those concerns. They too may go public in the coming weeks. Joel Hills, ITV News.
OK, let's go to Westminster and our political correspondent, Libby Wiener. Libby, how concerned will the government be by this?
Well, I think whatever they're saying in public, in private, several ministers are deeply alarmed. This is by far the most serious intervention by big business so far. Airbus, with a very complex supply chain across Europe, says it will pull the plug unless there is clarity on what sort of relationship Britain will have with the European Union in future. And consider this, we are 9 months away from leaving. We still have no deal on Ireland, no deal on customs and no deal on trade. Time, the company says, is running out, and I think there's no way of seeing this other than as a shot across the bows of some of the more enthusiastic members of the cabinet for Brexit, such as Boris Johnson, who believed that possibly we could crash out. I think this is saying loud and clear that would have a devastating effect on British manufacturing.
OK, Libby, thanks very much for that.
Now, it's not an idle threat, it's the dawning reality of Brexit, says Airbus. The government insists it's not expecting a no-deal scenario, but the official negotiating position is still that no deal is better than a bad deal. And Airbus believes that would be so terrible it might have to leave. And with it, thousands of high-tech jobs would disappear. More scaremongering from a company owned by Europe, say the Brexiteers. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, reports.
Airbus has gained hugely from being within the European Union. Indeed, the World Trade Organization has long accused the EU of giving Airbus billions in illegal subsidies. 6,000 workers at the Airbus plant at Broughton in North Wales make wings for their whole range of planes. It's a complicated process. Components are imported from across the EU, the resulting wings then flown off for final assembly in France and Germany, all eased by the customs union and single market.
People around here voted for Brexit. Your members, many of them, must have voted for Brexit.
They may have done. What were they sold, though? What were they sold? I don't know.
But shouldn't the will of the people in this area and nationwide, be upheld? They voted for Brexit.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't believe our members actually voted to lose their jobs. The government's infighting and the squabbling between the Tory party are leading to uncertainty through highly skilled jobs.
What do you think of this announcement by the company?
We've been told not to speak.
You've been told not to speak?
Obviously, it's going to upset anybody to lose your job, but there's nothing we can do about it. It's happening.
Well, it's going to impact on everywhere, isn't it? So, fortunately, I'm coming up to a retiring age, so that'll be it for me.
Airbus employs 14,000 people in the UK, and it says it supports more than 110,000 jobs in the British supply chain. The company estimates it contributed £7.8 billion to the UK economy in 2015, raising £1.7 billion in tax revenue. No wonder politicians have regularly visited Airbus over the years, from Blair and Brown coming here 13 years ago to David Cameron more recently. But today, Airbus warned ministers they'd have to withdraw investment here if there's no Brexit deal. And maybe withdraw it too if the new relationship with the EU is a lot more unfavourable.
Aren't you trying to blackmail the government here and overturn the will of the British people by making these warnings and threats?
We're just putting the facts out on the table about the risks we see from a no-deal Brexit.
Is that all you're trying to do? Aren't you trying to force the government to change its policy?
I'm in business, I'm not in politics. The points we're trying to make are the impact of a no-deal Brexit and the potential considerations we'll make about future investments.
I mean, you say a no-deal Brexit would be catastrophic. But doesn't that undermine the government's negotiating power, make it harder for the government to actually achieve a good deal?
Well, that's up to the government to consider.
Airbus insists today's message isn't new, that they've been giving ministers such warnings ever since the referendum and indeed before, and they wish other businesses had been just as forthright as them.
Well, it's worth stressing, Krishnan, that Airbus isn't entirely private enterprise. Just over a quarter of the company is actually owned by the state governments of France, Spain and Germany. Downing Street said today, in response to Airbus, that they are confident of getting a good deal on Brexit, one that ensures that trade is as free and as frictionless as possible. Now, tonight, though, BMW, the German car maker, have joined Airbus in warning that unless there's a lot more clarity and a lot less uncertainty by the end of the summer, then they will have to rethink their investment plans as well. Meanwhile, against this Brexit saga, of course, is this whole growing trade war between America and Europe. And today, Donald Trump warned the EU that unless it withdrew tariffs and barriers against American firms, he will impose a 20% tariff on European cars. 1 in 7 cars made in this country goes to America.
Thanks, Michael. Well, before we get to our immigration debate, let's just talk to a couple of our MPs here about the Airbus and BMW threats. Andrew Rossendale, no deal is starting to look totally impossible, isn't it?
It's going to happen that we will have a sensible agreement with our trading partners in the European Union. It makes no sense to have anything else. What we've seen today...
So no deal is better than a bad deal was always rubbish, wasn't it?
No, not at all, because at the end of the day, we want to trade globally, and we're not going to be sucked into a protectionist mechanism. So at the end of the day, if Airbus wants to trade with us and work with us, we're happy to do that. The real problem, of course, is the EU, who have a political agenda. They could have easily have sorted this out a long time ago. The negotiations have been so difficult.
But are you saying if Airbus want to go, you're not bothered?
It's not at all, not at all. But we are going to be an open market, and we're not going to allow our industries to be manipulated by a political agenda from Brussels, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Roshanara Ali, I mean, 100,000 jobs at risk today if Airbus go, not to mention BMW, who make Mini. Where's Jeremy Corbyn? standing up for British jobs?
Well, look, we've made it clear that it's very important we are in a customs union and that we have access to the to the single market. And if we are able to, and this is what Airbus has said, if we're not in a customs union and the single market, then there are major consequences. So we have set that out. And the second thing is...
But it's not Labour's policy to be in the single market, is it?
Well, many of us are campaigning to ensure that we do have access to the single market, because without that, frankly, businesses are going to suffer. And I think, you know, businesses have been incredibly patient in the face of Tory government division, where they're not putting the national interest and people's jobs and livelihoods first, and that's what we need to see. And that's why today's warning is a case in point of what's at stake, both in terms of tax revenue, jobs and livelihoods, that this government needs to put first instead of its own party political divisions.
How many months have we got before you announce something? I mean, it's 9 months is the deadline Airbus have given you. BMW have given you until the end of the summer for clarity. Do you think we're going to have it by then?
We could have had it a year ago, but the European Union have made it deliberately difficult. They don't want other countries to follow Britain through the exit door, so they're making it as hard as possible for Britain to have a sensible free trade agreement. We trade globally and we don't have political union with the rest of the world, so Europe, I'm afraid, or I should say the European Union, is really making this very difficult and actually playing with people's lives and people's jobs. They should sit down with the British government, agree a free trade mechanism so we can work together in future, and allay the fears of companies like Airbus and BMW. They won't do it because they're trying to keep us in the customs union. But if we do that, Rushanara, we won't be able to have free trade around the world and take back control of our trading policy, which is what we voted for in the referendum.
Let's get back to taking back control. That's what this was all about.
If you were thinking of celebrating the second anniversary of the Brexit referendum tomorrow, street party maybe, or just a quiet meal, Airbus had a sobering message today. There hasn't been one from a big company quite so bleak. Quote, put simply, a no-deal scenario directly threatens Airbus's future in the UK. Airbus had said as recently as February it would keep British operations long into the future. It appears to be the talk of a Brexit no-deal that worries it. There is a particular cause for aerospace suppliers to be concerned: the potential for UK-made parts to fall outside the rules of the European Aviation Safety Agency and thus no longer certified as usable on planes flying in Europe. But Airbus is not alone in suggesting that uncertainty is a problem and that a potential no-deal would be a disaster. What a difference 3 years makes. Back in 2015, Airbus was boasting of its place in the UK and the kinds of jobs it supports.
Well, the Broughton plant employs about 6,500 people and they're responsible for the wing assembly manufacture and the equipping and in a lot of cases the testing.
It's not over yet, but now there's a doubt.
We're going to be looking potentially at future investments across our sites, across this great country which produces great aircraft, great satellites. We have the most productive people based in the UK from the whole of our European operation, and we want that to continue. The UK is an important home nation for Airbus, but we have to say to the people listening that future investments will be under review.
The warning raises a bigger point for the whole country, that Brexit may have its most deleterious economic effects on manufacturing regions, and thus create more geographical imbalances in a country already very London-centric. The Treasury's made regional projections which agree with academic work on the topic. From this analysis, you can rank the regions most vulnerable to a Brexit shock, and the North East comes top with the most to lose. The manufacturing heart of Britain, the West Midlands, comes next. Scroll through the other regions, you find the one least affected is actually London, despite financial services losing some access to the EU.
Business leaders, traders in London are routinely, on a daily basis, dealing with markets, suppliers, customers, brokers in every country in the world. London is already that kind of hyper-global model. Whereas many other parts of the UK are not like that. They're much more Europeanised in nature, particularly places like the Midlands of England and the north of England. Over the last 20 years, what you see is that the economic interrelationships between the Midlands of England and the north of England have actually become deeper and deeper with the rest of Europe.
The paradox is that sometimes regions with most to lose were most enthusiastic to leave the EU. The West Midlands voted 59% to leave, the North East 58%, meanwhile in London only 40% did. Manufacturing supply chains sprawl across regions. A factory may only sell to a UK customer, but ultimately its product is slotted into a plane, train or automobile that gets sold in Europe. Its sales are thus vulnerable to any curb on EU trade.
We've obviously been looking at the implications for many, many months since the referendum, and really we felt it was time to put on the table some hard facts about the true implications of this decision if it was to go the wrong way.
Well, one hard Brexit supporting economist, Patrick Minford, famously said in 2016 that if we leave, it seems likely that we would mostly eliminate manufacturing, leaving mainly industries such as design, marketing and high tech. But this shouldn't scare us, he said. Well, let us reflect on that possibility. I'm joined by Paul Everett from the ADS Group, a trade organisation for the companies in the UK aerospace, defence, security and space sectors, and from Wellingborough, the Conservative MP, Peter Bone. Very good evening to you. Peter, Paul Everett, if I can start with you. How widely are those Airbus views shared?
There's a universal view across industry, irrespective of the industry. All have exactly the same concerns.
How narrowly is that about the no-deal scenario as opposed to other?
The no-deal scenario is the one the Prime Minister put on the table back at the beginning of this process when she said that, no deal was better than a bad deal. So from an industry point of view, when we are looking to plan and against what, how we base that plan, the backstop, if you like, is that position. So at the moment, that's the only certainty we have against which we can plan. Now, clearly, we've been striving quite hard and working quite hard to find a better solution.
Well, so is the government. I mean, let's be honest, they don't want no deal. In fact, it appears to be a sort of negotiating backstop.
I just put that, so threatening to blow your foot off, okay, might well be a negotiating strategy, but it is not one that fills industry with a great deal of confidence.
Right. I put up some Treasury figures there. They were actually what would happen. They were provisional figures about regional effects and what would happen if we came out without a deal, we were just on WTO rules. Do you buy those figures? Do you think that the effects are bigger in the more manufacturing parts of the economy?
I mean, what we've seen so far, that's clearly the case, because the primary impact of customs arrangements and non-alignment on regulatory issues predominantly falls on heavily traded goods and goods that are, in their production regularly crossing borders. And that's clearly much higher for manufacturing of all kinds. I mean, my colleagues in the food and drink industry would point out all of these issues apply directly to them as well.
Right. Peter Bone, we should listen to warnings from the people whose jobs, livelihoods and profits depend on these things, shouldn't we?
Well, good evening. 280 days until we come out of this dreadful European Union superstate. And of course we should listen to all views, but you'd have to weigh up whether the views are right or wrong.
Well, they don't make these views lightly because unlike politicians, people running public companies aren't allowed just to make stuff up because they're not allowed to mislead markets and send incorrect signals to stakeholders. So we have to take it seriously because they say it, they probably mean it.
Well, I don't accept that because Airbus has cried wolf before. They want, of course, us to stay in the European Union in the single market, and that they are a European-based company, and it's a very political move to announce this just a few days before the European Council. This is project fear number 3, and only in February they said their long-term future is in the UK. They also said that their best skilled workers were here. Why on earth would a company want to damage itself by relocating when its best workers are in the UK?
Well, perhaps because we're moving one of the things that makes us an advantageous place to make these parts. I mean, it's their judgment, not yours. In the end, this just comes down to who should we believe is better talking about Airbus's future? Airbus directors and the trade body who says, by the way, everybody else thinks the same, or you and a handful of other people who for many years wanted to come out of the EU?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think that's quite right because the economists for free trade have just published a report that says over the next 15 years we'll be £140 billion better off by leaving the EU. And after all, Airbus doesn't just do business with the UK, it imports stuff from China and America. And I think one of the ridiculous things said they were going to relocate from the UK to America and China. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all because they're on WTO rules.
Well, it may be that they've got cheaper prices or something, and if you remove one advantage, suddenly the whole thing plays in the game. But look, you mentioned this Brexit, economist for Brexit. Patrick Minford is one of those economists. In fact, I think he's one of the leading ones. He said we would mostly eliminate manufacturing if we left the EU. Exactly what is happening is, you know, with companies warning that that is what might happen. The Treasury analysis backs that up. You're all singing from the same hymn sheet. The way in which this is working is it hits manufacturing hardest, doesn't it?
No, that's untrue. I mean, we heard all these warnings before the referendum that manufacturing industry would go, have an economic dive, unemployment would go up, interest rates would go up. And none of that, of course, happened. And really, this is purely a political statement ahead of a very important European Council meeting. Manufacturing is booming in this country, and of course more people are investing in this country day by day. And the future, of course, for business is outside the European Union, where 90% of business growth is going to be. So there's nothing to fear from Brexit at all. And of course the British people have decided that's what they want to do.
OK, I won't pick that, but I will put that back to Paul.
So let me be very clear, and I think, you know, Peter, you know, may be unfair because Peter obviously, you know, doesn't deal in analysis or evidence, just assertion. So we've looked, Airbus have looked, and lots of companies have looked at what are the implications of there not being a deal. We've also looked at what are the implications of having border checks, the reimposition of customs, a whole range of things. And we've pulled together the evidence, we've analysed it, and we can see that irrespective of the type of Brexit we have, there will be an additional cost, which is why, you know, manufacturing is hit, and that reaffirms the Treasury view. But also, you know, we have had to consider a no-deal Brexit because that's what people have actively discussed. Peter and his colleagues were on the House of Parliament floor over the course of the last 2 weeks, you know, making a very rabid case that the government had to have the ability not to have a deal. Now, for us, there is a council meeting next week. You know, we go back to March when a transition agreement was agreed. That was a great relief to industry because that gave us extra time to ensure that we could adapt to any set of conditions, any new arrangement. But that deal, that transition arrangement
isn't long enough.
It doesn't exist yet.
We haven't got a deal.
We haven't got a deal yet, and so this is the issue for industry.
Very quick final remark from Peter Bone. You can reply to that because it is put very, very clearly there what you have, you know, what industry actually thinks of what you're saying.
Well, what they're actually saying is they want certainty of what's going to happen, and I agree entirely with that. That's why it's absurd.
No, that's not quite what he's saying.
Free trade deal is the last thing.
Not quite.
But he is saying that, and what would happen, of course, if we were to have a no deal? People want to know, and that's why the government's got to prepare for that situation.
We need to come out there.
We do need to give certainty to interest, but there is nothing to fear from coming out on world trade rules.
Well, and industry disagrees with you on that. We do need to leave it there. Thank you very much, both. Thank you very much.